Hello and welcome to Charlotte After Dark. Pestilence by Laura Thalsa, one of a 4-part series of the Four Horsemen romance. Gotta say, I like this one. It was a pretty good one. Set in beautiful British Columbia, my home. Woo! Not a lot is set in British Columbia, and even less so set in the relative geography of the area I'm living in, so that was a real treat right off the bat. I gotta say, the author, she's from California. She didn't get it too wrong, so I'll kind of touch on that in a little bit, but kind of getting into the meat of it. We are in year 5 of the Horsemen. The Horsemen came to Earth, and they seem to have appeared, and then they just kind of rode off in the 4 cardinal directions. And then after that, there was just no trace of them for 5 years. But in between the time when they showed up and then the time when they left, technology completely crapped out. It's still around, but it's very unreliable. It doesn't work really well. So everyone has moved into a more primitive style of living, a more primitive style of being, even though occasionally lights can turn on and they can get the news occasionally. For the most part, technology just doesn't feature too heavily in this story. So we start off with Pestilence, the least sexy of the 4 horsemen, at least in my personal opinion. I wasn't too stoked about Pestilence upon sort of hearing the concept and the idea for it. I was all down for it, but when you think sexy romance, I just don't know if Pestilence comes to mind. A famine I can get behind. War? Heck yeah. Death? Sure, bring him on. Disease, boils, spas, not sexy to me. Boy, was I wrong. Laura Thalsa, what a genius. She did something I didn't expect and made the literal embodiment of disease and pestilence sexy. So we meet our main character, Sara Burn, who is working as a firefighter in Whistler, British Columbia. And I'm going to be getting into some local geography and stuff like that here. Whistler, BC is it's a very high-end ski resort in the area. Generally speaking, when me and other people go skiing, we don't go to Whistler. You know what I mean? Whistler is a little bit more for the wealthy. Strangely enough, for the Australians, a lot of Australians like to come to Whistler to just bum around there. This was one of my main points. I won't get into it right away, but there's some just local knowledge that didn't quite mesh, and it would have been really nice if maybe she had gotten a Canadian or a BC native to kind of be like, hey, is this all accurate? But anyways, Sara and 4 of her friends are drawing matchsticks to see who will get sent behind or who will stay behind to try to finish off Pestilence, basically. It's like a suicide mission. They're like, Pestilence is coming through town. We all have to evacuate because Pestilence doesn't actually need to touch anyone or do anything like that. He just needs to be within an area, and within several kilometers of where he is, death and disease will strike. So Sara Burn draws the short match in this case, so she has to stay behind and try to kill Pestilence. So as Pestilence is making his way down the sea to sky, which is, the sea to sky, it's a highway anyways, pretty famous highway in the area. He's making his way down the sea to sky, and so she kind of ambushes him and just loads him full of shotgun, buckshot. Anyways, she fires a shotgun and just completely pelts the man and his horse. He's got a really nice horse that is completely white and very beautiful and becomes a kind of a cute character. So she shoots him up, and Pestilence is on the ground. He's he's mangled. He looks all shitty and everything. And he starts begging her. He's like, please, don't do this, and, he's just really wrecked. And Sarah's she's not enthused about this, but at the same time, she feels like she has to do this to save humanity. So what does she do? She takes some lighter fluid, douses the man while he's still alive, lights him on fire, and burns him to death alive. And the whole time he's just describing it's he is screaming in agony, and she's not feeling great about herself. But she's all right, job well done. I've killed the horseman, and this is only the start of the story. So she goes and sleeps in a tent that night, and that night the shambling corpse of the horseman will slowly reanimating corpse of the horseman. He's you know, like literally missing his hand. He's just bone and everything. And he like gets her up out of her tent. He's like, I begged you for mercy and you showed me none. And she's all like, ah! And so he's like, fuck you, human. I've never met a more vile member of your species than you. I am going to make you suffer. And so he takes her as a prisoner, and he like ties her hands up and everything and starts making her like walk behind the horse while he starts continuing on his journey. And like within the day, he's completely healed, just immaculate. And she's all like, oh no. And he's like, what, you thought you were the first to try, man? You thought that all of the people, I crossed all of Canada and not a single person tried to kill me? And she's like, yeah, fair enough. So basically it just turns out that no one ever survived to tell the tale. The bulk of the story, at least in the beginning, is really just like Sara running behind the horse and getting hella fucked up, and then them squatting at people's places. Basically the horseman, he'll like travel for a day, then he'll find some place to squat whether or not the place is occupied, and so he starts doing that with Sara. So, you know, the first night Sarah's like, ow, I really hurt. I've been running behind a horse all day. The second day she's even more fucked up, and then eventually gets to the point where she just can't walk anymore. And she starts getting dragged behind the horse, and she's like super messed up. And at this point, you're probably sitting there like, this doesn't sound like the basis for a good romance, does it? And it sure don't. The author really has to do a lot of character development in amongst all this torture, because, you know, Pestilence, like every time Sara will like fall and she'll be like, please, just God, put me out of my misery. He's like, no, suffering is for the living. F you, man. He's like really vindictive. I forgot this one scene and it was pretty brutal. And this was the moment I'm like, how are they going to redeem this man? Like, this is
problematic.
So Sara decides she can't take this anymore. They're squatting in someone's house, and I think they're like on the second floor, and she's like, I gotta get out of here, man. So she tries to make her grand escape, and Pestilence, I haven't described him yet, so I'm gonna describe him right here. He's basically described as like a tall, blonde man. You know, he's got like long, wavy hair and everything like that. He wears like armor of gold and everything like that. He's got like black clothing underneath, and he wears like, you know, a breastplate, and he's got a gold crown, and he's described as being very like mournful in his eyes and like pouty lips and everything, and just like the ultimate specimen of a man. So he also has a bow and arrow, like you know, quiver full of arrows and a bow and everything like that. So Sara tries to make her escape, and he gets her like right in the shoulder, and then he gets her again in the back and like straight fucks her up. And she's all like, oh god, no, please. And he's like, no, fuck you, takes the arrows out. And I'm just like, this is a romance, right, guys? Like, not mistaken. It does start to improve from there. I forget the exact circumstances under which it starts to improve, but as they start spending days together, Sara starts to sort of prove that humanity is not quite as vile as Pestilence thinks. On every house that they go to, sometimes there's people there. And sure enough, when Pestilence shows up, they start getting sick. And so Sara starts taking care of them. And she'll take care of them until they die, usually. And this is like a running theme. Like, they'll go to a place, and sometimes there's like kids there. Sometimes there's like a couple there. And inevitably they die. And every time Sara's like, please just spare them. And Pestilence is like, I can't spare you. It's my mission. And Sara's like, what do you mean it's your mission? You could choose to stop if you don't want to, or if you want to. And it's sort of a back and forth between them. He's like, no, I'm divinely ordained to like punish your kind. You guys fucked up the earth. You fuck up each other. There's nothing good about you. And so every single one of the horsemen at different times, it's only Pestilence right now, but Pestilence has to ride through and essentially deem if humanity is beyond saving or not. So he does have a choice. And Sara's aware he has a choice. And so at every step, she's like trying to convince him, is like, no, we're not as bad as you think. We're pretty good. And then as they continue to meet more people prove him either right or wrong based on their actions. As we go through, she starts slowly like cracking Pestilence's shell and everything like that. It starts off where, you know, she has some hot chocolate and she offers him some, and he like takes it and pours it out, and she's like, man, why you gotta be such an asshole? And so she's like, there's nothing wrong with like trying human food. It's not like a vice or anything like that. And he's like, all right, I guess I'll think about it. And so he tries like pie for the first time. They get to a place and there's some pie there, and she's like, oh my god, pie, yes, thank you. And so Pestilence is like, I've thought your words over, and I've decided it is no great sin to try human food. So he takes some of the pie, and he's like, this pie's really good. And he starts eating her fucking pie, and she's like, no, why'd you have to come to this realization when I got pie in front of me? And so from there, like, their relationship starts to kind of change, and then he starts to reveal more of his human side, I guess. As we come to find out, Pestilence is, like, that's not a name. He is literally, he's like an ageless thing that's just been around ever since disease first started striking humanity. And so now he's in like a mortal body and he can experience human emotions. Sara starts to learn it's like he doesn't enjoy at all what he's doing. He doesn't really like watching people die. He doesn't like killing people. He just does it because he thinks he has to in a way. But she kind of is just like, well, why would God put you in this form if he didn't mean you to feel these human emotions? And Pestilence like, I think you're right. I'll have to think about this. So the major turning point in their relationship comes when they get to Vancouver and they meet some severe armed resistance, and basically like Pestilence kicks Sara off the horse and she goes to tend to the dying basically, and he goes to infect everyone else and kill all the people that are basically resisting him and trying to kill him. So Pestilence is like hella shot up and everything, but Sara doesn't realize it, so they actually start traveling over the water, like on the horse and everything like that. Which, by the way, part of the way through, Sara decides, like, I can't just, like, have this horse here and not name it, so she ends up naming it Trixie Skills, and, like, giving it a backstory of, like, you were just a woman turning tricks on the street, and all you wanted was the love of a good man, and Pestilence is like, my horse is a man. She's like, I don't care. Really cute dynamic stuff all throughout the, like, horror, and it does get pretty horrible. So after Vancouver, they're riding on the water. Sara basically like saves him from falling into the water and gets them to safety, and she like drags him into a house. Eventually he heals, and then they end up finding like some alcohol and getting hella drunk. So they get drunk and they almost kiss. But then I think either Sara or Pestilence, they back off. They're like, what are we doing, man? This is a bad idea. But then the next day, Sara is, she's got like a hell of a hangover and everything like that. And they're running on water and she's like, I'm gonna puke. So she like leans over and then she falls into the water. And Pestilence thinks that she either tried to escape or kill herself. He's all like, no, you can't leave me. And then he kisses her and it's like a really dramatic moment. And then from there on, they just are like, they're just like going for it, you know? And it's surprisingly better than you might think given the subject matter. Like I said,
problematic.
But I'm here for it. I'm all about problematic. I find that to be some of the more interesting romances. I don't know, I just don't like this like fluffy cutesy bunny shit, you know? I just find like there's just not enough meat to it to sustain a whole book, a whole plot line, you know? There needs to be some sort of major conflict for the characters to get over, and it takes quite a bit of skill to go from like literally trying to kill each other to eventually falling in love with each other. Another major turning point is when they reach a couple named Rob and Ruth. And I believe at this point they're in the US. So Rob and Ruth are an elderly couple and they decided not to evacuate. They're like, our time has come. We knew you were coming. And they kind of welcome Pestilence with open arms. And they're highly religious people. And so they're asking Pestilence a lot of questions about God, about his mission and everything. And they're basically like, we don't blame you. Like, we know this is like your duty and everything like that. And he's really taken aback because no one's ever accepted him, and he's never really like talked to humans aside from Sara on that level. Eventually, Rob and Ruth, like the old nice elderly couple, they get quite sick and then they start to die, and Pestilence starts taking it quite hard. And so Sarah's sitting there tending to them and everything, and at one point they're like praying for both of them, and it's kind of like, I thought it was like a really sad scene because they're like, you know, this mission is really hard on Pestilence God, like, you know, just give him the strength to see it through. And Sarah's been tasked with a hard mission, God, like, give her the strength also. And you're like, oh, that's kind of nice. Rob and Ruth end up sadly dying, despite Sara being like, you have the power, you can save them. And Pestilence is still digging his heels and like, no, like, I cannot waver from my mission. It's very upsetting to the both of them, even though Pestilence is the one doing it. So they end up burying Rob and Ruth and then heading on to, I believe it's Seattle. When they get to Seattle, they actually find out, or Sara finds out, that Pestilence has actually been riding on ahead of her, so that she doesn't get caught up in the crossfires and everything. And so Seattle's completely wiped out. They end up encountering a couple of different various groups. At one point, they encounter an armed group that it looks like they might be a bit of trouble, but then, it all gets resolved. They encounter a bit of a cult, and the cult kind of is like, spare us, Pestilence, we'll give you these women. We know you like women. And Pestilence is like, huh? Get out of here. And then he just leaves. So eventually everything kind of comes to a head when I think they're a bit past Seattle, and I think I don't know if they're in Oregon or if they're getting to the California area, but regardless, they encounter a heavily armed group, and this group like fucks Pestilence up, and then they kind of take Sara captive, and Sarah's like trying to get to Pestilence, and they kill Trixie Skills, or like, kill, because you can't actually kill these people. Eventually they really fuck up Pestilence, and then Sarah's sitting there like trying to get them to stop, and they're like, you fucking whore, you're sleeping with this horseman, blah, blah, blah. And then they end up shooting her full of shotgun or whatever, basically like what she did to Pestilence. And Pestilence is like, no. After Sara gets shot, it goes black from her point of view, and since we're from her point of view, as far as we know, she's died. And then she ends up seeing Death, or Thanatos as he's called, and Death is like another hot brother. We'll be seeing him I think like we'll probably see him throughout, but we'll definitely see him in book 4 because he's the very last horseman to come. It's Pestilence, War, Famine, then finally Death. He basically talks to her and he's like, what's going on with you and my brother? This is kind of weird. He's like, but I'm intrigued, so I'm not going to collect you just yet. So he sends her back. We find Pestilence has basically completely killed the armed militia and has taken Sara and was like tending to her wounds and everything. So they end up holding up in some sort of a mansion for like a month, and it looks like Pestilence hasn't done anything, and she's all like, maybe he's finally come to his senses and he's like not doing the shit anymore. At first it looks like a good reprieve where, Sarah's recovering and Pestilence isn't doing his shit, but then she manages to get a bit of TV feed, and it turns out Pestilence is fucking up the entire West Coast. She's like, what the hell? And he's like, I've had this reach the whole time, bro. I just didn't feel like using it. And she's like, dude, you have to stop. Do you know how many people you're killing? And he's like, dude, they almost killed you, and you're like one of the best people I know. Like, if they could do that, they're just not worth saving. Sara ends up just being like, nope, this is my breaking point. I can't do this shit with you anymore. So she tries to leave. And Pestilence is like, you can't leave, bitch. And by this point, like, they're deep into their relationship, like, they've been having sex left, right, and center. I think Pestilence, right, at some point or another, I completely glazed over this scene, but they have sex, and right away, the very next day, Pestilence takes her to a church and is like, all right, we're getting married. And Sarah's like, no, we're not. And he's like, but I've been inside you. Like, we shared this connection. She's like, and he's like, wait a minute. Was I not your first? And he starts getting like really weird about it. And she's like, dude, you need to back the fuck off. And so eventually he does, but he's not happy about it. At this point, he's made his intention, like he wants to marry her, he loves her, he's like willing to do almost anything except for stop his mission. And so Sarah's like, can't take this anymore, you are literally killing the whole west coast of North America, F off. And so she tries to leave, and Pestilence is like, no, fuck you. And so he like drags her into a room and like boards up the room and doesn't let her leave. But then after a couple days, like he's getting miserable, she's miserable, and he's like, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore either, and he lets her go. Sara has this brief moment where she's like, well, maybe he'll give up his mission for me after all, and not so. So she ends up leaving and making her way slowly back to Vancouver. Once she reaches Vancouver, she encounters this like old guy, and he's all like, oh, haven't you heard the news? Because she's all like, what's been going on? And like basically Pestilence has vanished. All the people that were ill in the West Coast recovered. And then she realizes like timeline wise, she's like, oh my God, he did that even before he released me. So like he had already made his choice and everything. And she's like, why didn't he tell me we could have been together? So she ends up going back to Whistler, reuniting with her family and the former firefighters and everything like that. And she's basically just like living her life in Whistler. And then one day she gets a knock on the door. And who it is Pestilence. And he's all dressed in like regular clothes. He doesn't have his crown or nothing on. And he's all like, I come to you humbled, like, I'm a changed man, blah, blah, blah. I decided to like give up my mission. Basically, Pestilence wants to live now as a human man. And she's all like, or Sarah's like, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. Thank God. And so they basically get together and they end up like living together as man and wife. It's really adorable. And then it does like a 5 years on. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, war has come. And you're like, oh my God. So all in all, really, really good book. I don't have really much bad to say about it. Definitely the subject matter is not for everyone. That should be abundantly clear by this review. It's very, very brutal, you know, like maybe not everyone's into that. I personally like really enjoyed that. I really like morally conflicted characters and morally semi-reprehensible situations, but ones where no one's really in the wrong. They just have like conflicting viewpoints and conflicting morality. So it was really good in that. The only thing I will say, I could tell the writer was American. Okay, this is gonna sound really stupid, but the weather was one of the biggest tip-offs I had that they weren't from this area, because when she encounters Pestilence for the first time, it's snowing up on Whistler. And if it's snowing up on Whistler, like a light powdery snow, it's raining in Vancouver. And generally speaking, because it's wintertime, you just don't see the sun. It is a very gray place here. And so it seemed like every second day she was talking about, it's like, oh, the sun was beating down on me, or oh, it felt like summer. And I'm like, no, it didn't. Not in BC, it didn't. It certainly did not. Little stupid things like that. And then one of the other ones was she was talking about how when the horsemen were first, when they first appeared, she talked to the Mounties, and no one in Canada calls the police the Mounties. Everyone's aware of like the red uniform of the Mounties. Those are Mounties, specifically when they're wearing the ceremonial uniforms, but when they're not in those ceremonial uniforms, they're called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or everyone calls them the RCMP, right? So just the fact that she talked about calling them Mounties, I was like, no, we don't use that language. So the biggest indicator I had for the fact that this person clearly had no real experience with BC was the fact that Sara lives in Whistler. I'm not sure if any of you viewers know about like the housing situation in BC. It's pretty bad. Sara is presented and her family is presented as like very salt of the earth, working class, just regular types of folks. Whistler is a high-end resort town. People live there full-time, as I discovered. I Googled this. I was like, do people actually live in Whistler full-time? Sure enough, they do. There's like 10,000 residents that live there. And I scoped out property values because I'm like, I wonder if someone could live there on like a firefighter's wage, because she's like apparently a full-time firefighter. No. Yeah, I just don't think that's possible. They've got some like occasional one-bedroom condos that are going for, I guess, semi-reasonable prices, but I'm just not buying that just this regular old person, like a firefighter and everything with a regular working class family, is living in Whistler. Some of the properties there were going for $5 million, $7 million, you know. And these are fairly high-end prices, but Vancouver's a very, very pricey place to live. So it would have probably been a bit better if they had set it in maybe Squamish, because the property values are a little bit less there, or even set it in one of the suburbs like Coquitlam or Surrey, or like, you guys probably don't give a shit about any of this, but it was so glaring. I remember reading it and I'm like, she lives in Whistler? No, that's wrong. And I have to admit, I have read War already. I'm having to reread it for probably the next review that I'm doing. But I remember this problem does not get any better, and is one of the main complaints I had with the next book, War, is that it is set in Jerusalem. And I can't say that I'm familiar with the people and the culture of Jerusalem, but there was no local flavor. Like, I've read works by Muslim authors, by Middle Eastern authors, and there's a definite flavor. They don't interact in quite the same way. Some of the things that they say, the practices that they do, they're just different. You know, it's a very different culture, and it felt like the author is going for a very big, ambitious, global style story, which is like, I can respect that. I can, you know, it's not an easy thing to do, but I actually Googled the author and she's from California. And it's like, man, if you're from California and you're still fucking up this significantly when it comes to just portraying Canada, like, man, you probably shouldn't be trying to portray Jerusalem, man. That's something else, especially when you're trying to portray war, you know? Because there's just a lot of shit going on in that region of the world. And as far as memory serves, the main character in that book comes off as just like almost just another North American chick. And it's like, it might not bother some people, but it really bothered me because I remember reading that coming right off of the Daevabad series. If you've ever read that, it's sort of like a Middle Eastern fantasy. And local flavor was present in every freaking word, every chapter, every interaction. And so going from that to war and just seeing just the complete lack of culture was quite jarring. So it's like, if you're going to do a book that is like spanning the globe, you got to get consultants in. You really got to know your shit. You know, you should probably get someone proofreading to just be like, is this correct? Would a character say this? Would they interact with the opposite sex in this manner? And for most of War, So all in all, this is not a diss on the series. It's just like a personal pet peeve. Really good. I really enjoyed Pestilence. Pick that shit up. I say after I've already spoiled it. I'm really making these videos under the assumption that you'll see the title, probably read it, then probably come back, or have already read it and it's like, oh shit, I read that book. Which is probably like the smallest demographic in the world, I'll admit. But anyways, that is neither here nor there. So in the next review, hopefully, I won't flake out and just read something else. Next review, hopefully, is War. And Famine. Famine was supposed to have come out a couple months ago, but it's not coming out until September 1st, which is quite sad and disappointing to me. So, you know, I'll review War and then we'll see where we go from there. So anyways, have a good night, everyone.